So whenever I run into some strange issues related to Flexbox, I often just copied over a solution from Stack Overflow and tried it out. And if it worked, I just continued and called it a day. But I recently learned much more about it and I feel like I have quite a good understanding of it now. And honestly, now that I understand it better, it's way more fun and easier to work with. Let's dive into some examples. Now here we render a basic list of items which uses the flow layout by default. It renders all the items below each other because that's how it always happens in a flow layout, similar to a Word document, for example. By default, an unordered list has some padding on the left, so let's remove that first. And somewhat surprisingly, it looks like that removes the bullets as well, but actually they're just hidden outside of the box. Now if we set the display property to flex, we went from the flow layout to the flex layout. And by default, the flex layout renders elements next to each other. This makes us see the bullets again, which we don't need for this demo, so let's remove those first. Now you might think, well, I can do this as well by changing the display property of the list items to inline, which also renders the items in a single line. But the key difference here is that we are now still in flow layout. But what does that even mean? Well, mainly that with Flex Layout, we get access to a whole new range of properties. So for example, probably the most common use case is setting Flex 1 to evenly distribute all items in the parent element. Oh, and by the way, since all modern browsers support CSS nesting by now, let me use that as well. Now, Flex is just one property, but throughout this series, we will explore many others as well. But for now, let's take a better look at each item. This way we can see that they have not only been distributed, but they actually grew. And this is very useful because we didn't have to specify any hard-coded value or percentage here. So that means that resizing the container will automatically resize the children as well. But it can only do so until it can't shrink any further, because then it will introduce a scroll bar. Now normally we will be able to make the items even smaller by setting the word wrap property to break word, which allows the layout to break words into pieces when they are too long. This can be useful if you have URLs in your text, for example. But that doesn't seem to work here. But somehow setting the minimum width to 0 fixes that. Now we could just move on here because it works, but in this series I want to teach you how Flexbox really works and why it does the things the way it does, so that you don't have to read the boring specification documents. And in this case, the Flexbox specification mentions that the default minimum width of Flex items is set to auto, which means that the minimum size is the smallest size a box could take that doesn't lead to overflow. And in this case, that means that the minimum size is equal to the largest word. So by setting it to 0, we kind of removed that default minimum width. Now, if any of this information is new for you, like it was for me when I started diving into this, then a like would be much appreciated. In the next video, we're going to dive deeper into the flex property. See you there!